3, 4.
You are listening to 89.3 WAMH in Amherst College Radio. You can continue listening to NEPR on AM 640 or nepr.net. But right now, this is the start of Uncultured. I'm the Spronz. Hello. Happy September 28th. Today in the studio, it's me, Esperanza.
Me, Rojas.
I'm Chimoy.
And I'm Mark.
Cool.
Correct.
We have no plan for tonight, so you're in for a...
We have a really good plan. We have Mark in the studio, who is a extraordinary researcher, and
he studies history. So
He stu-
I'll introduce him with this African proverb I just stumbled upon on the internet. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter.
Are you a lion or a hunter, Mark?
I'm probably the historian.
So, last night we went to a very interesting talk, the three of us, Mark, Rojas, and I. Does someone want to introduce what that talk was?
So it was a talk put on by the Amherst College Republicans, titled, in essence, why the U.S. response of...
It was why the war against terror was justified.
Yeah, why U.S. military action after 9/11 was justified and saved American lives.
A topic that was never actually discussed. What was discussed was why students who take issue with the war are on people are pointing, are on the team of slavery, concentration camps, and monarchy. Many people were insulted. Many people were outraged. Marc live blogged the whole thing. And yeah, we're here to unpack the event, pick apart his thoughts, etc. So yeah, Marc, what was your expectation going in?
Yeah, I'll give a brief sort of background on the event. It was put on by the Amherst College Republicans and the Massachusetts Alliance of College Republicans. And it was originally titled, the title we read, Why U.S. Military Action After 9/11 Was Justified and Saved American Lives. And originally the only speaker slated to speak was Michael Graham, a conservative radio host who also worked on several unsuccessful Republican congressional campaigns and one unsuccessful Republican presidential campaign, and got fired twice from his various radio stations for saying controversial things about Muslims and about the Columbine school shooting, which is one of those things that you think you could probably steer pretty clear on. They later invited a few other people, some of whom showed up, others did not, and the event, it turned out, had very little to do with why U.S. military action after 9/11 was justified, and a lot more to do with the fact that some students put a banner on Val on 9/11 that said something about the shame, there's no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people, which was apparently far, far, far too much for Michael Graham to bear without coming to Amherst College and fighting
Where is he from? Do you know?
I don't know where he's from originally, but he operates in the Boston area.
Oh, okay. So he didn't have to travel super far to come here.
No, I don't think so. And my understanding is he wasn't paid to do it. It was a personal favor.
That's weird.
Yeah, he just really wanted to come here and find some
Here
snowflakes.
Specifically, a liberal arts college specifically.
It's a good place to find them.
Yeah, I mean, he opened up his speech saying, I told some friends of mine and when I was down in D.C. recently about that I was going to Amherst College, and they said, whoa, you should watch out, that place has a reputation, and proceeded to then berate the audience for the rest of the night.
I like how he treated us like toddlers a little bit. Like at the end of his talk, he was like, "You guys have done really good." I'm like, what does that mean? I just sat here and listened to you. I don't know.
I think he expected us to throw our shoes at him.
Marc,
wish
would
I
you
had.
mind for the we do have some audio clips, but would you mind for the sake of listeners and also Chinmoy, who wasn't here that night, give just a brief overview of the arguments presented that night and your reaction to those arguments?
I'm intrigued by what's been said so far.
The argument was essentially, it was a straw man argument. He argued, if you're against the war on terror, it's because you're against all wars, because you're a crazy radical pacifist, and if you're against all wars, then you're on the side of slavery, you're on the side of concentration camps.
He's quoting him, like he's not
Yeah, he said,
Marc is not. Here's
I've
a
got
clip.
Here,
We can
go with
play a
clip.
little bit of this. Here we go.
I'm the bad guy because I acknowledge that as bad as war sucks, sometimes war is the only tool to stop other things. Your side is, I'd rather have slavery, a monarch, and concentration camps, and you're insulting other people. Don't do that. If that's really your position, just keep it yourself, because you're a despicable person.
So yeah, that was a little clip from about 5 minutes into his talk.
Yeah. Right before that, he had said, if the choice is between war and concentration camps, then you choose concentration camps. Your team concentration camp. And he said that to the audience at large.
As a
yeah.
Jewish American, Marc, do you feel like you are on the side of concentration camps?
I thought about that real hard, and I decided, no, I'm not on team concentration camp.
And you're also not on team.
I'm also not on team war on terror. Somehow there's some space between team war on terror and team concentration camps. It's a delicate middle ground, but I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's hard. I feel like we're all in this studio struggling with finding that same middle ground. It's funny. He seemed to like pride himself in that middle ground though. At one point he was like, the people on the right, and the on either extreme, the people on the far right and far left ruin it for everyone else in the middle.
That was actually the other speaker, but yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Does anyone remember the name of that other guy?
And it was Bob Ruff's Edge. That's his real name.
Ruff's Edge.
Yeah. But
I feel like he probably has made like at least one really. Never mind. I'm not gonna say it. I was gonna say like. Never mind. Like he just. I feel okay. Never mind. I was gonna make like a really bad. I'm saying it. I don't know why I keep saying never mind. Like,
moving on.
I think need to be
The concentration camps thing was also ridiculous because it just the notion that you have to choose between I'm responding to Rojas's earlier question about what my thoughts were on his point of view. The notion that you have to choose between bombing innocent civilians and like allowing atrocities to go on is just sort of fallacious, and it's not like a decent academic argument. Like, I know this is the Amherst College Republicans, but it's the Amherst College Republicans. Like, presumably they'd bring someone qualified, right? Okay, someone who's qualified or who doesn't start his speech by saying, "I promise you, I have the worst education in the room. I barely went to college."
Also, hi Ian.
Hello.
We never introduced you, but good to have you here.
Thank you.
I was also curious on how you felt. As you said, that they are the Amherst College Republicans, we expect no less than some jingoist patriot to come and explain to us why we're failing to live up to our nationalism. But I think everyone in that room was like, at least personally, was like a little taken away at I heard someone when I was walking out say he was like arguing at the level of like a sixth grader. And it sounds like what they were saying to you was that they didn't really organize this event, and they were blaming it on the like Massachusetts chapter of the Republicans for giving them the speaker. But I've also heard a cynical take that I think might be closer to home, where someone pointed out that there was a camera in the room, and the camera wasn't pointed at the speaker, but rather pointed at the audience. The implication being this was a bit of a bait. Like, let's bring a controversial speaker, again, going snowflake hunting, and let's get the biggest reaction we can get from these like loony liberals, and then we'll broadcast it on air, and everyone can stand and be in shock at the poor like reasonable conservative who just wants to like stand up for soldiers, because that was his big thing, was that we hated soldiers, and we were shaming soldiers who it is not their fault that they go to war. So yeah, I don't know what your take is on the Amherst College Republicans hosting this event specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell. In the past, when my first year here, the Amherst College Republicans brought Patrick Moore, a climate change denier, who proceeded to get into a shouting match with biology professors over whether or not climate change was real. It is.
Wait, what biology professor?
I don't know. I wasn't actually there, but I learned about this because of the proud AC Voice tradition of live blogging and Ethan
Cool.
Corey.
Way to keep a tradition alive.
There you go. Live blogging, specifically Republican events. But they have this history of bringing these people who sort of believe discourses, who can shout the loudest in the room. But it's always hard to tell whether, when you get to a new generation of college Republicans, which I think we're at now, whether this was or wasn't their fault. We'll sort of have to see what they do the rest of the semester, if anything, because they've sort of engaged in that sort of provocative stuff already with the posting that picture on Facebook of all of them smiling in front of the KKK signs and so on and so forth.
To give a little context to that, there was a news hung on campus our first week of school here, and a group of students printed a series of posters saying "This is our campus, not the KKK's," and plastered them around school. One of those places around school happened to be a room where the Amherst College Republicans were meeting at the time.
That's just in like the campus center, by the way. It's not like
It's a public room.
specific room.
And they took that as them being targeted by these posters and being accused of being white supremacist. And so they took a series of photos of themselves with the signs and a long post basically explaining that they felt targeted by this, and there was like a culture that was intolerant of conservative views and would just call them like racists and white supremacists. And at the very end was like, oh, also we denounce the noose and white supremacy in general, but the real victims of this are us, essentially.
Yeah, that is the context. The other one thing I wanted to say about last night was the way that he came in, this is Michael Graham again. The other speakers were fine. One of them was sort of wonkish, but he didn't talk that much. And the other was just a soldier who I think they brought in to be like, look, you can't criticize soldiers. Here's
At
a
some point, the
soldier.
soldier said
Yeah.
he would be on the side of
Yeah.
the, like, all these Democrats huddled in, like, the auditorium, kind of just very loudly expressing their disapproval of this, like, guy's speech, which was cool. I liked the soldier who, and his comment. That was said right after he mentioned that he fought with a Muslim brother, he called him. So that was cool. Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No worries. But the thing about Graham was he came in and he kept saying you, like talking to the audience, you put up this banner, you hate soldiers. And I don't know what led him to believe, sort of from the moment he got up on stage, that the people in the audience were not predominantly Republicans, other than the fact that the people in the audience
That's a really
were
good point.
not
Yeah.
predominantly white. That's the only thing I could think of, was looking at that audience. There were a lot of people of color in the audience, and maybe he got up there and was like, this is not my audience.
Or again, that kind of like, I think reinforces I think it's our hypothesis. I don't know. Our hypothesis that it was baiting like liberals on this campus is like using the you being like you know, like that's. I
Came
feel
into it knowing
that,
who he was speaking to.
And it wasn't Republicans. It wasn't fellow Republicans. It was an audience who hung a banner against the war on terror. Like,
And who hates soldiers and is on team concentration camp, to clarify. And the other thing is, I mean, to his credit, for a Republican speaker, he was very pro-drugs and pro-sex. So here's some good quotes from him.
Oh, he was crazy.
He
I
has
forgot about that.
the only thing you're going to remember from college 10 years from now is how to turn any cylindrical object into a bong. That's what he said.
Don't worry, it's legal here, he said as well.
I missed that one. And then he said, what's up with Game of Thrones? I like porn as much as the next guy. Kill the dragons, keep the porn. Neither of these had any sort of context to them, as far as I can remember. The Game of Thrones thing came up because he was like, oh, do you guys watch this TV show about, like, the war and terror? Oh, also, do you guys watch Game of Thrones? And then he went to his little rant about Game of Thrones and porn. It's like, none of this has to do with the war and terror at all. It was just sort of exemplified the fact that they sort of brought, like, a wannabe Alex Jones to talk about something that should sort of be semi-serious.
Everyone in the studio glanced at me. Yeah, I guess my next question for you, Mark, is what do you think there is? What argument from a conservative would you have liked to have heard or expected to have heard had this not been a baiting? Like, is there an argument for why the war on terror was justified?
I mean, I think you can try and make the argument. The argument you make, and Michael Graham very, very, very briefly mentioned this once. He said, the evidence that the war on terror was justified is the fact that the Twin Towers haven't fallen down again. I was like, okay. So, like, the lack of a terror attack is, in the conservative viewpoint, it points to the fact that our war on terror discouraged terrorists, it took apart their networks, and we sort of have enough security in the States to stop them from attacking again. It's hard to say whether that's true or not. Either way, I think you can make the...
Also, it's only a terrorist attack if it's against the United States. But they're like, if you count like all the terrorist attacks like in like the Middle East or like Africa, like then like, are you not counting those as like part of your tally as far as like this was a justified war against terror? Because then no, like it was, I don't know, it's just...
No, you're right, because there are more terror attacks now than there were in 2001 and 2002. So the sort of number of terror attacks globally has gone up. The number affecting the United States has gone down because we haven't had another 9/11.
Wait a second, Mark. Are you telling me that as we've ramped up our intrusion into other countries' foreign affairs and send billions of dollars into guns overseas, there's actually been more terrorist attacks?
I mean, I don't want to be on team concentration camp, but yeah.
Mark, what?
But some students put together a fact sheet with all this information about
you didn't need it though. That's the sad thing, is that like he was not giving any facts. Like you couldn't fact check him.
Right. But like just the things I found out while perusing this fact sheet were that we spent $4.9 trillion on the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and sort of like our drone program. $4.9 trillion. That's enough to sort of pay for universal health care 3 times over by the Fox News estimate, which is sort of many, many times more than it would actually cost to do universal health care. So even if you believe that invading Iraq and Afghanistan was, a good decision that saved American lives, do you believe that it saved more American lives than having universal health care for the past 17 years? And I would say probably not.
Does anyone want to give a PSA? Do you want to give a PSA, Chimoy? Can you give it the bear PSA, Chimoy? May I ask you to do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Where is can you add useful information to it? Can you where is this bear PSA? Does anyone know?
Wait, is your mic not working or?
It works.
You can hear
I
me?
can hear you, yeah.
Hear myself, yeah. It wasn't working before.
Why? What was wrong with it?
It just wasn't coming through. We could hear him in the studio,
What
but
just
not through the headphones.
changed, though? What just changed?
I think Chimoy doesn't need the actual bear paper. Chimoy, do you want to just talk about
But
bears'
it's
safety?
Funny. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right. Have you ever seen a black bear, Chimoy?
Yeah, I've seen a black bear.
They're in California. They are, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them, yeah.
I've
I've
seen a
nev-
black bear too.
I've never seen a bear in my whole life. I really want to see one.
Like, have you seen one in a zoo?
I've only been to a zoo like a couple times. I guess I have, maybe. I don't really remember the times I've gone to a zoo though. I remember seeing polar bears. Here it is. Bear Part 1 Identification. Here you go.
The most important skill to have during a bear encounter is the ability to determine what type of bear you are dealing with, as this will determine your course of action. It is also to distinguish black bears from grizzlies, as they are of similar size and can vary greatly in coloring. Not black. The easiest way to identify a grizzly is by its distinct shoulder humps. These humps, muscles, used for digging roots and slashing prey, are absent in black bears. There you go.
So now we've identified black bears. But what should you do once, cool, I know it's a black bear. I know it's a brown bear. But do I run? Do I hide? Do I...
Never run. The bears run really quickly. You probably want to make yourself as big as I know this.
Mark is staring me in the eye as he says
Listen, I went to Virginia public schools and they taught us bear safety.
What?
And you make yourself as big as possible to try and scare away the bear, especially black bears because they're smaller than grizzlies.
Yeah.
That's an interesting fact, because I've always heard that black bears are smaller than grizzlies. But this PSA says that they're about the same size. So that could be some new information right there.
It's fake news.
But the one thing about the making yourself larger, I've been taught, and this isn't saying that it's absolutely true, but this is what I've learned over the years from multiple people, is that black bears, yes, you make yourself bigger, and you try and scare them away because they're kind of shy. But grizzly bears, or brown bears, as people sometimes refer to them, but I think they're talking about grizzly bears, is essentially that you don't want to do that because they are very aggressive and they'll just come and maul you anyway. So yeah, that's the key distinction that this card is talking about, is that if it's a black bear, you can try and scare them off, but if it's not, then don't try that.
Wait, what should you try if it's a grizzly?
Are you religious? I would not be surprised if the Virginia public school system let me down and taught me incorrect bear safety, so probably listen to Chimway.
The interesting thing about grizzly bears and black bears is that you said other black bears in California, and there used to be grizzly bears in California, as is often noted, because the famous bear flag, that's a moment in California history. The raising of the bear flag is kind of the beginning of the California as occupied by the United States, and then later turned into a state. But in the process of colonization, the grizzly bears were actually killed off entirely.
What?
So there's no more grizzly bears in California, as far as I know. And there's only black bears. Which I think is why the flag is ironic. I always think it's ironic.
Celebrating just this like past that was lost creature.
Anyway, that's the bear PSA that you wanted me to read.
Thank you. That was the most elaborate bear PSA that this Western Massachusetts channel on radio has ever heard. Usually it's just people laughing and like not able to read. Do you know if there's still a manatee PSA, Roas?
No, I know what you're talking about. It was like half destroyed.
Yeah, that would be funny.
Was it half destroyed by a manatee?
I wish.
Adopt a manatee is what it was.
Oh yeah, adopt a manatee. It was really cute. Do you want to read your disorientation piece, Mark?
Which one? Oh yeah, I could do that. I was like, what did I write?
Does Rojas want to give us an explanation about what disorientation is, or was, or is?
And continues to be now in its third year, although it has a tradition at other colleges dating back. I don't quite know how long or the original origin of the concept, but essentially as first years arrive on campuses, a disorientation guide is a leaflet or a zine with the intent of disorienting you from the institution you're about to attend to. So while the institution is taking you into its embrace and showing you all the lovely things you're going to be doing and learning about and all the great community you're going to be building, it's a report from students and traditionally teachers, although I don't see why staff shouldn't be included in the future. Kind of painting a more realistic picture of what life at Amherst College is, the failures and contradictions of it as an institution and as a place you're going to spend the next 4 years trying to learn how to live. And it's something that Esperanza, myself, and Mark helped put together this year, although Mark was involved in the past two efforts, and he wrote a piece this year called Tragedy and Farce that I think we're asking him to read now.
Yeah, and oh man. Another PSA is just if you want copies of last year's disorientation guide, let me know, because I have I have a couple of hundred in a box in my room.
No.
100? We have like 6 in my room that I feel guilty about not distributing yet.
Yeah, we put them everywhere, but we just had too many because Amherst is too liberal, in the bad sense. All right. So my piece is called Tragedy and Farce. It's about history and stuff. Karl Marx once wrote, and I paraphrase here, that history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. Fear of this repetition has inspired misguided attempts from people across the political spectrum to resist the erasing of conventional history, while also ignoring the actual erasure of marginalized histories and refusing to engage in genuine discussions about America's past. Liberals argue that the history of the supposedly exceptional United States will prove Donald Trump the exception, not the rule, and that those of us who turn towards cynicism and realism regarding our country's history risk forgetting it. Conservatives, meanwhile, assert that removing statues glorifying Confederate heroes is tantamount to erasing the Confederacy from the record forever. Both are wrong. Liberal journalists, commentators, and even historians are increasingly relying on a long, distorted set of facts to score rhetorical points against the Trump administration. For example, John Cassidy of The New Yorker quoted JFK in saying, "I am a Berliner," in order to mock Trump's isolationism. He conveniently ignored, however, that Kennedy had already tripled troop levels in Vietnam twice in the prelude to America's disastrous intervention there. Kennedy is an oft-glorified figure who, we often prefer to forget, ran on a platform of scaremongering about a so-called missile gap between the nuclear arsenals of the US and USSR. It was he, and not Trump, who brought the world to the brink of nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is not to say Kennedy did no good, nor to defend Trump, but rather that history is something that must be viewed in context. And this context is often missing from liberal glorification of the American past. More recent examples of such historical illiteracy abound. Jelani Cobb, also of The New Yorker, referenced the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in the introduction to an article about Republican plans to amend the Constitution. In celebratory fashion, he recounts that the delegates set about creating a 4,500-word lattice of compromises and counterbalances that has, with the notable exception of the years 1861 through 1865, cemented the Union of the United States. The Constitutional Convention has become a sacrosanct chapter in American history. This quote ignores the true history of the document. Of course, as historian William Hoagland writes, the Constitution was openly intended by its leading framers to obstruct democracy. Women, black people, and poor people could not vote. The Senate was, and still is, an unrepresentative and thus undemocratic body. Yet this is all ignored by liberals when they call back to American history. The crimes of the United States at home and abroad are omitted in order to present Trump as some monstrous deviation from a history of benign and even benevolent U.S. presidents. This glorification of the American past is not confined to liberals, however. It is perhaps even more apparent in the case of conservatives and Confederate statues. The most recent salvo over Confederate iconography, I'm better at writing things than speaking them, began in earnest in the aftermath of Dylann Roof's murder of 9 black churchgoers in Charleston, South Carolina. Then it was the Confederate flag that was questioned and attacked. More recently, this has expanded to criticism of the statues of Confederate heroes like Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, and calls for the statues to be removed. In August, right-wing protests against the removal of a statue of Lee in Charlottesville resulted in the murder of Heather Heyer and the injuring of a dozen other anti-fascist counter-protesters by a white supremacist. Other than outright racism, the most common conservative argument against the removal of these statues is that they represent, quote, Southern heritage. Of course, numerous Southerners have debunked this notion. What is there to be proud of in the enslavement of other human beings, they ask. Furthermore, posing Confederate iconography as Southern heritage erases the identity of Southern black people who have their own rich traditions throughout the American heartland. Another common argument against removing statues, advanced by liberals and conservatives alike, is the notion that to remove statues is to erase uncomfortable histories. In fact, the truth is the opposite. By celebrating the leaders and even common soldiers of the Confederacy, the South is refusing to grapple with its own appalling legacies. If we remove these statues and replace them with memorials to the millions of black people who suffered and died under slavery, then we can truly begin to struggle with our historical burdens. One last argument, along a similar vein, raised by right-wingers, is where we draw the line. President Trump argued in a press conference in August that, were we to follow the logic of anti-Confederate protesters to its natural conclusion, statues celebrating the slave-owning George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, among others, would also need to be removed. This is certainly a conversation worth having. As I noted before, American history is all too frequently whitewashed. Too few know the depths of racism that our founding fathers stooped to. Instead, we've built up a cult to them. We celebrate old wives' tales about how George Washington never told a lie instead of focusing on how many slaves he owned, and the fact that he crushed the pro-democracy Whiskey Rebellion with overwhelming force, inaugurating the long American tradition of state violence against protesters. Should we remove all statues of slave owners? Should we take down Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, and co.? Undoubtedly, as views continue to change, the answer to this will be a resounding yes. For now, it may be too early, but the conversation is worth having, if only to try and center other histories that have been truly erased. I'm not arguing that history has no place in modern politics. There are certain valid comparisons to be drawn between what is occurring today in the United States and the rise of fascism in Europe in the early 20th century. Indeed, the history of American Nazism and the KKK provides useful insights into the neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements of today, though few liberals are keen to admit that we have had and continue to have our own Nazi problem on this side of the Atlantic. Whitewashing the past, however, ignoring American crimes and the less than admirable legacy of our country, is not the way to go about resisting. Conservatives and liberals are both correct that history can and has been erased. The history in question is not that of the Confederacy or the American presidency, but that of the working class, of black people, of indigenous Americans, and of marginalized peoples across the globe. The very structure of the history profession is engineered in a way that silences many cultures. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, for example, indigenous Māori convey their history through whakapapa, oral genealogies, and moteatea, songs and chants. Increasingly, both historians and courts are beginning to see these as valid historical sources, abandoning Western conceptions that the written word is the only sure form of evidence. Here in America, we too must turn away from Western-centric conceptions of history and historiography. Amherst College itself ignored and erased its awful legacy for almost 2 centuries, until student protests finally forced it to face the truth of Lord Jeffrey Amherst's crimes. But our work does not end there. Whether you intend to study and write history full-time or merely engage in politics and activism, understanding the ways in which our present academic culture and historical tradition erases the marginalized, whitewashes the uncomfortable, and celebrates slavers and murderers is critical to ensuring true progress. Marx claimed that history repeats itself, and we see that happening today. The only way to ensure the darkest moments of history are not repeated is to face up to their existence and engage with them unreservedly, without exception. No problem.
I said thanks, and he said no problem. I was on my mic off. Rojas, you said something interesting the other day, I think, if I'm not wrong, about history not repeating itself, about it just never really going away. Am I making this up?
I don't remember this. Maybe with like more context. I might.
I have no more context. I just vaguely remember you saying this. It might have been someone else I had a conversation with. Also, Crystal is now in the studio. Hello, Crystal. Hi. Yeah, cool. So you wrote this obviously like soon after Charlottesville, right?
Yeah, I wrote this so like a couple weeks after Charlottesville. Well, like we had sort of abandoned the whole Charlottesville thing, but we're still talking about Confederate statues, and people were like, statues were sort of being taken down in the middle of the night, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, it's such a catastrophe. We're erasing our history." That's an exact quote. They said.
This is definitely an interesting conversation, and there's a couple things that I would like to add, if that's okay. And one is about the mascot, and the other is just taking it back to my home in California, my home in Santa Barbara. And one of the things that talking about history, we're talking about heritage and all these different things. One of the things, I guess, events that I remember very vividly that brings back statues, brings back icons within history, is the canonization of Junipero Serra. I don't know how many years ago, a few years ago. And, I feel like a lot of people, I don't hear anyone talking about it anymore. I don't hear people even aware that this happened, this event. And basically, Junipero Serra is a divisive figure in California history. He's considered the founding father of California. He's considered, a great figure that brought civilization and brought progress to California. Yet, many indigenous people don't agree with that and say, the missions were an institution of colonialism. A lot of people say the missions were good, missions are bad. There's a lot of arguments. But no one can deny that the missions were institutions of colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think from an indigenous perspective, a critical indigenous perspective, colonialism can't be... Yeah, that's another thing, but basically it can't be justified in this day and age. I don't think there's people I'm sure that try and justify colonialism. I shouldn't be that optimistic, but yeah, I think from indigenous perspective, colonialism can't be justified, and therefore it's very difficult, considering that, to justify the missions. Now, this canonization of Serra is the fact that the Pope, what's his name? The Pope right now? Francis, he moved forward on this process of making Serra a saint. And, there's beautification, there's canonization, and there's different things. I don't, at the time, I was reading about this, so I knew more of the process, but it's since gone. But this event was coming up where he was going to canonize Serra, and around California, indigenous people were holding ceremonies. There were protests going on, and there were other things, but I think the main events that were moving were ceremonies, and trying to raise awareness and healing to our communities from, the historical trauma that was brought up, the legacy of the missions, and conversations were being had. There's Native California people who are, I guess, pro-mission, and there's people who are against the mission, but no matter, where they stand, a history of colonization, a history of violence and damage was brought up in Native communities. So there were ceremonies held, and there was talks, and people talking to the Franciscans at the missions today. People, sending letters to the Pope explaining why he didn't act in a saintly way. What are the implications of him being a saint? You know, it's supposed to be being godly, being, you know, almost like God, you know? And so what does that mean to Native people if that's how God is supposed to act? And all these different things, right? This was the conversation going on. But regardless, he is now a saint. That's my understanding, is he now a saint. And, you know, I remember that moment when I found out that, you know, all this work and this energy and healing that we put in didn't change the fact that the Pope had still gone through this process. And I remember being like, well, what's different right now in reality that he's a saint, you know? What does that mean for me? And I said, you know, nothing really is different. It's just I guess a continuation of colonialism that's been going on since the missions were founded. And it's just like a realization that many things have changed, you know, but there's still a core foundation of within colonialism that continues around the world for people to be canonizing, you know, someone who is the forerunner, the person who brought colonial institutions to California. Now you can argue that wasn't his intention and all that, but I think his actions and the history kind of speaks for himself, that, you know, no matter what your position, he was not acting like a saint. Now this history, sorry about this, goes up for me to saying that a few, maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I was going through Facebook and I saw something, and it was a picture of, in front of the Santa Barbara mission, they have a statue of Serra, and what this picture was a link to it was a link to an article that showed a picture of the statue with its head cut off, and like someone had painted blood like running down. And then next thing I know, I get a text from some of the people I know back home saying, "Did you hear what happened to the statue in front of the mission?" I go, "I know, like that's, you know, that's crazy." And I was just thinking, like, what are people outside the Native community, or even other people in the Native community who I don't know, thinking about this? And I, you know, in the internet, you have like the little comment sections, you know, and I was reading some of them because I was curious, and it was funny. One of the comments goes, no one cut off his head. I'm paraphrasing. No one cut off his head. It was lightning that came down, and that's real blood. Set it up miracles that he needed to be. And maybe this was a certain demographic that read this newspaper, but most of the comments were like, well, you know, the statue had it coming, sort of thing. And
Good newspaper, sounds like.
it made me realize, you know, there are conversations going on, and people, you know, are looking at the history and the issues we brought up. At the time, I kind of felt like no one's really listening. But there are people who are listening to the history, and I think history is important in that way. But I guess that's going back to the whole issue of statues and the whole issue of, you know, heritage, and a lot of people feel very connected to the history of Spanish colonialism in California. It's a big part of the people's identity there. So yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to bring up, is just that story. It reminded me of it, and the fact that Serra is a saint now, and that just reminds me that we need to continue thinking about what decolonization means, and being aware that colonialism continues to this day, maybe in different forms, but, you know, it's continuing. And secondly, you brought up about the mascot, which is interesting because I remember when I flew in, and I'll keep this short because I've talked in a while. I flew in.
Take as long as you need.
I flew in. I applied for the flying program. Is that what they call it? And that's the reason why I applied to Amherst, actually. But that's a different story. And I heard people talking about the mascot issue, but I didn't really connect it. And when I said, "Oh, okay, I got accepted to this college, and it was like my favorite college I wanted to go to." And I said, "Okay, I want to go." And then a couple weeks later, I was reading this this book, Indigenous Peoples History by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. It's a pretty good book. And
Pretty great woman.
but one of the things that struck me when I was reading it is she talked about Jeffrey Amherst and his role within the history. And that was the first time everything clicked together. That I just accepted to go to a school that was named after, a person who advocated for killing people with dogs and killing people with smallpox. And it wasn't, just any people. It was indigenous people. And I forget the exact wording, but, a lot of those people talked about extirpation of indigenous people. That was the terminology, I think, that they used back then. And reading that and listening to that, for some reason it hadn't clicked together. Even through the whole mascot issue that I was learning about, I was like, okay, that's happening here too. The mascot issue is happening in a lot of places. I remember back home, there was the Carpinteria Warriors. They had the headdresses and the different things on murals, on banners. And one of my cousins who was going to school there, he raised the issue of, it's not okay to have. I don't feel comfortable as a Native person going to school and with a Native mascot. It doesn't. I feel like it's representing me, and also I don't appreciate being a mascot. And in sporting events and this and that. You're promoting a caricature, and on top of that, it just doesn't feel good to be a mascot. That's not exactly what he said. That was the sentiment. And he, it's just amazing the backlash you get from trying to change these mascots. It's just incredible to me. I don't understand it. I remember it was one of the first times I was really in marches and all that, and that I can't remember.
How old are you?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
That last statement was kind of a lie, because I've been in marches and stuff a long time. But that mainly it was just me being carried by people. But the point being that I remember there being some rocks thrown. I remember my cousin getting death threats and all this stuff just because he wanted to change a mascot, in a high school. And it just, I didn't really get it at the time, but it is really incredible the kind of backlash that happened. And I wasn't here when that whole thing about the mascot was going on, but maybe you can talk about what that was like on the campus. But that moment when Amherst, the school, and Amherst, the person, clicked, I don't know how to describe that feeling I got, And when I come here and I see Amherst everywhere, it's just a reminder every single day of, what Native people, Indigenous people have gone through, And at one level, it's like...
And continue to go through, right?
Yeah, and continue to go through. Yeah, very good point. It reminds me that I got to keep working and make sure that we can improve for the next generation, and maybe we can work to change the legacies. But it just makes me sad that no one gets that feeling when they see the Amherst logos everywhere.
Right.
And the fact that I've talked to people about this and they say, oh yeah, but there's no way the name's getting changed. There's no way. I mean, sorry. And then at one level, I'm like, well, why am I going here then? And even you get the feeling that people are thinking that, well, if you don't like the name, why don't
Then
you not go here? And
then don't realize that it's just, are you asking me to leave this country? That's what you're essentially asking.
Well, leave the campus, right? But it's also just a bad feeling when you actually think that. Should I be going here, when this is the name of the campus? And I don't know if people realize that affects Native people in that way. And maybe it's just me. Maybe other Native people aren't. But I want to be starting, me and the other Native students in the Native Student Organization, I think we want to start raising this issue, see what people think, and to let people know how we feel about it.
That'd be cool to have
Because,
a poll.
like you said,
Something at least.
we got rid of the mascot, which is really good. But that's our work isn't done yet. So anyway, I got a little
Don't want to apologize.
talkative
Thank
there.
you so much. to answer your question about, I guess, how it was like, the mascot only got changed because of a fool out, right? Like that was part of Amherst Uprising. That was like probably the only demand, as far as I know. Like that was met immediately. Not immediately. Like it had like people had to protest over. I think homecoming's coming up, right? Soon. Like people were out at football games during homecoming with signs, saying, "This is Lord Jeffrey Amherst. We are not Amherst." Lord Jeffrey Amherst. And a bunch of, if you haven't gone to homecoming. Have you gone to homecoming?
No.
It's weird. It's a weird place. Honestly, homecoming is. You've gone once. I don't like homecoming at all. Like if you just walk, like it's so like physically divided almost. Like there's like this like side over here with like the tents and such. Anyway, there was just a bunch of backlash from rich alum. Actually, last year I remember like a plane flew by. Plane flew over the football stadium that was like Go Jeffs. Just refusing to like let go of this. There's also been like you said, our work isn't done. Like people fly planes over football fields saying Lord Jeff. People like there's a clothing line that still says like sells Lord Jeffrey Amherst like apparel to the Amherst the Amherst community, quote unquote. So it's just like you go ahead.
Yeah, is that at AJ Hastings or like where?
No, it's online. Like someone started like their own little online like distribution
boutique.
of
like after the mascot was changed.
Exactly, after
because they were like it's not going to be at AJ Hastings.
Exactly, but they'd still want to wear like a horrible person's name, and I don't know, it's just ridiculous. I think the only time I remember my freshman year this came up, and our professor, because that was when Amherst Uprising came up, so I feel like all teachers kind of felt obligated to kind of address that our school was revolting at the time. So I remember my sociology professor asked our class like, hey, what do you guys think about the mascot issue? And since the class was like pretty predominantly like students of color, we were all like, yeah, I think like we're all on the same page here. Like this is a bad guy, but like there should be like no problem changing him. And I just remember this like very innocent lacrosse like white player was like, I just don't see what like the problem with having him as a mascot is. Like it's just history. Like you can't change history. So what's the point? And then my sociology professor kind of like helped me make some analogy of like the stormtroopers. Like imagine your mascot was the stormtroopers, which was like a league in Nazi Germany. So like imagine your mascot was the stormtroopers. That they committed genocide just the same. Like would you be proud of that mascot? Would you want that mascot? Like of course not. I don't think the dude got it, to be honest. I'm pretty sure he is photographed in Amherst College Republicans photos. So he's like
he's team concentration
he
camp.
is team concentration camp. Yeah, apparently like. Oh, Crystal, you weren't there, but we were earlier. We were talking about the speaker who came last night, and he pretty much said that if you're against the war on terror, then you're pro concentration camp. It was a really bad argument. We'll talk about it later.
Say, it makes as little sense as it sounds like it makes.
I guess it's frustrating to have to explain to someone that you don't want to go to a school who's named after someone who would advocate killing myself, killing my family, and killing my people. You know? And
it's tiring.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe like if I say it that way, some people get it. I've said that to people and they go, "Oh." Yeah, when you put it that way, like, and they're not people who were pro mascot. They're people who were like, "Oh yeah, we should change it," but still, they didn't get that feeling,
Right. No, I remember just like getting really angry at this dude and being like, "How would you like it if we like just going off and making immediately jumping to a Nazi analogy just because that's what genocide means. Like that's what I think of when I think of genocide. Is I think of like this foreign history, right? Not but it's like it's here. Like our country is.
And I think this goes to Marc's point of like how terribly wrong we are about American history. That to us, like no, there is nothing wrong with our history. There is nothing wrong with having, like, it's just our history. And you have to point to, like, this thing we've been taught to revile and hate. You know, like, would you be proud to be a Nazi? It's like, no, but that same feeling you're absolutely right, should go to, are you proud to be an American?
Wow. Okay. That's a bold statement, I think.
Or at least are you proud to be a Jeff?
Yeah.
Is the thing is though that people get mad, you know, when Native people make that analogy, they get really mad. But if you look at it on the other side, no one's getting it otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a song by
Do you want to play it?
yeah, sure, we can play
Okay,
it.
what
There's
song
a
is
song
it?
by Aslan Underground called 9, 10, 11, 12. And
Can I find it on YouTube?
yeah, you should be able to. I mean, I haven't listened to the lyrics in a while, so. But the point of the song is that basically comparing Columbus Day to 9/11 and saying, do we have to evoke the terror of this day to get you to understand what Columbus Day means to us? You know, do we have to go that far? And that's what they're saying in the song, and it's the exact same thing. You know, do we have to evoke one of the most terrible episodes in history to get you to understand, you know, our point, you know, how we feel about this, you know, and how it's affected us in our lives?
Can't find it.
Oh, you can't find it?
How do you spell Asla?
Oh, I'll just type it
Here.
right now.
There you go. I can't reach it to you. You might have to come to me.
But the question of history is an important one.
Again, our proverb was so well suited to this show. Coincident. Like, I don't. What's up?
Third one down.
Third one down.
It looks pretty good. It looks like a not a live
There
version.
is an ad, and we don't like those.
Because we hate capitalism.
This is true. I really like that. Thank you.
It's
The little bits I could understand.
yeah. If you read the lyrics, it makes more sense. Yeah.
This is so underground that I can't find the lyrics to my way. Are you? Just
I mean, they're
like
they're pretty
some sort of
popular group, to
hipster,
be honest.
or just kidding? They are. I
Yeah.
haven't heard of them. Astlan Underground. So now you know. What were you saying, Crystal, about ice caps melting?
Oh, for reader to reader.
Do you want this, Mike?
So for reader to reader, we read books with kids, and the two that I'm reading are The Skin I'm In, which is about this girl who experiences racism in her high school, and the second one is called Exodus, and it was a sci-fi fiction book about what if the ice caps melted, and the predicted year was 2099.
It's happening a lot sooner than that. But good prediction. What's up? Oh.
You're listening to 89.3 FM Amherst College Radio, WAMH 89.3. This is Uncultured. Tonight we've been talking about history. We've been talking about Republicans, Nazis, history again. and
Colonialism.
There you go.
Can I share one of my favorite songs sung in
Liberals.
Quechua?
Yes.
Yeah, please do.
Cool. This is Luzmila Carpio Tarpuri Kusum Sarata. that was Luzmila Carpio. She's from Mexico. And she served as ambassador to France for a while. So she's a really, really cool, dope Native woman. I guess since we've been talking about colonialism a lot, I think it's like important to bring up something in like recent like news that has kind of just been making me really angry personally. And why? For you? I did make it louder though. Like just now? No, like a while ago. Okay. If it's too loud, it's Crystal's fault. Just kidding. I just really like being mean to Crystal. I should really stop. It's like my way to
Also, you gotta consider where you are.
Close to the mic or not, right? Yeah, so Puerto Rico, and it being just hit by Hurricane Maria, and like it's just crazy to me that like the whole country, like imagine, like I've been in power outages before, you know, like it happens frequently. I also like live in a poor area back home in Las Cruces, like of the neighborhood, but there's always like parts of the city that have power, you know, like you start texting your friends immediately being like, hey, like do you have power, but I can never imagine just like your entire country just not having electricity. Like that's just insane to me, and how it's like hardly being talked about like anywhere is really, really upsetting. And so just like give some context, like the US has had Puerto Rico as a colony since 1898, after they passed the Jones-Shawforth Act, which gave Puerto Ricans a second-class sort of citizenship. So they can fight in the U.S. military, and they have fought for the U.S. military, like to win wars for the United States, but they can't vote, which just, I don't know why. If I were Puerto Rican, I don't like know a ton of Puerto Ricans, so I don't want to say it, but like if I were a Puerto Rican, why wouldn't I want to vote? Like for, you know, like I'm sure a lot of them wish they could vote for the U.S. president.
I'm sure all of them.
I'm
like,
sure. Yeah, I can't
anyone
imagine
living in a democracy being okay not having a vote.
Right.
Sorry, I'm back.
Wow, that just went from like distant
Soft
boy
boy.
off in the mountains to
Hello. Love poem.
maybe later. Yeah, actually, if you have any that you like.
I could read some good
I was
ones.
looking up a bunch of koans today. I can give you.
What's
but anyway,
a koan? Sorry.
a koan is like a paradoxical Zen statement. Surprisingly, I was doing
Wow.
this for computer science. Can you believe it? Anyway, but yeah, so they've been Puerto Rico has been in colonial rule since before the 20th century. And the Young Lords was this kind of I guess movement that in the I'm not like 100% sure when they started. Does anyone else know?
The young. I just know 1980s is a number
Yeah,
I'm gonna
like
throw. out there.
Yeah, 80s, 90s. These Young Lords Party emerged, and their goal was to liberate Puerto Rico. And they were like severely suppressed by like the U.S. military, not military, but like CIA. Like there was vigilante groups against them. But I just decided to look up their. I've never actually read this, so I just thought it'd be kind of cool to read. What's up?
Well, I mean, I don't know that much as far as the Young Lords go, but I know that they were one of the first groups to be targeted by COINTELPRO. And that was one of the there's a lot of, you know, that's a very complex topic, but in that case, you know, they're contemporaries with the Panthers, they're contemporaries with the American Indian movement, and so maybe a little earlier than the 80s and 90s.
Okay,
I mean, that's just my thinking.
I could look it up really quick.
Will you look that up?
Yeah.
It's about Puerto Rico. So my good friend Manny Eduardo, who's a great organizer I know, he's just let me know that Senator Warren will be doing a town hall forum meeting. So Senator Warren is Senator Elizabeth Warren, the senator of Massachusetts. I don't know who the other one is, but she's one. So she'll be at a town hall forum meeting tomorrow, Friday at 5 p.m. in Springfield to discuss updates regarding Puerto Rico. Location will be Chestnut Middle School on Plainfield Street. All are welcome, and he says, please share.
Nice. Thanks, Manny. The Young Lords Party began in 1960s in Chicago. So sorry, I never even mentioned why I'm like bringing up the Young Lords Party and Puerto Rico in the context of the hurricane that just hit them. Like, U.S. colonial rule over Puerto Rico is making it incredibly hard for them to get the disaster relief they need.
It's also just like years of austerity on the country. There's no infrastructure. There's
so
like
they're just
predatory capitalists. Just
and that's what's gonna happen. That's what makes me so mad. Is that's like likely what's gonna. That's what I see, at least. I can't say that's what's going to happen, but that's what I see happening, is that this country is now devastated. Can like poor farmers like develop, like, you know, rebuild their lands, or are like wealthy Americans going to go in and build some hotels from like the rubbles on the beaches of Puerto Rico and like make money off of that? You know, like that's this maybe the cynic like in me talking, but anyway, to inspire us to liberate all countries that are under colonial rule, let's read the Young Lords Party 13-point program and platform. So it starts, the Young Lords Party is a revolutionary political party fighting for the liberation of all oppressed people. 1. We want self-determination for Puerto Ricans, liberation of the island, and inside the United States. For 500 years, first Spain and then United States have colonized our country. Billions of dollars in profits leave our country from the United States every year. In every way, we are slaves of the gringo. We want liberation and the power in the hands of the people, not Puerto Rican exploiters. Que viva Puerto Rico libre. We want self-determination for all Latinos. Our Latin brothers and sisters inside and outside of the United States are oppressed by the American business. The Chicago people built the Southwest, and we support their right to control their lives and their land. The people of Santo Domingo continue to fight against Gringo domination and its puppet generals. The armed liberation struggles in Latin America are part of the war of Latinos against imperialism. Que viva la raza. We want liberation of all third world people. Just as Latins first slaved under Spain and the Yankees, black people, Indians, and Asians slaved to build the wealth of this country. For 400 years, they have fought for freedom and dignity against racist Babylon, a decadent empire. Third world people have led the fight for freedom. All the colored and oppressed peoples of the world are one nation under oppression. No Puerto Rican is free until all people are free. 4. We are revolutionary nationalists and oppose racism. The Latin, Black, Indian, and Asian people inside the U.S. are colonies fighting for liberation. We know that Washington, Wall Street, and City Hall will try to make our nationalism into racism, but Puerto Ricans are all of the colors we resist, are all of the colors, and we resist racism. Millions of poor white people are rising up to demand freedom, and we support them. These are the ones in the U.S. that are stepped on by the rules and the government. We each organize our people, but our fights are against the same oppression, and we will defeat it all together. Power to all oppressed people. 5. We want community control of our institution and land. We want control of our communities by our people and programs to guarantee that all institutions serve the needs of our people. People's control of police, health services, churches, schools, housing, transportation, and welfare are needed. We want an end to attacks on our land by urban removal, highway destruction, universities, and corporations. Land belongs to all the people. 6. We want a true education of our Creole culture and Spanish language. We must learn our history of fighting against cultural as well as economic genocide by the Yankee. Revolutionary culture of our people is the only true teaching. 7. We oppose capitalists in alliance with traitors. Puerto Rican rulers or puppets of the oppressor do not help our people. Like the mayor who said that Trump is doing, this is me now. Like the mayor of Puerto Rico who said that Trump is doing everything in his power to bring aid to Puerto Rico right now. They are paid by the system to lead our people down blind alleys, just like the thousands of poverty pimps who keep our communities peaceful for businesses, or the street workers who keep gangs divided and blowing each other away. We want a society where the people socialistically control their labor. Venceremos. We oppose the American military. Is that how I should say it? Should I say KKK? I don't know. We demand immediate withdrawal of U.S. military forces and bases from Puerto Rico. Vietnam, and all oppressed communities inside and outside the U.S. No Puerto Rican should serve in the U.S. Army against his brothers and sisters, for the only true army of oppressed people is the People's Army to fight all rulers. U.S. out of Vietnam, free Puerto Rico. 9. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We want all Puerto Ricans freed because they have been tried by the racist courts of the colonizers and not by their own people and peers. We want all freedom fighters released from jail. Remember when, sorry, again, intersection of Esperanza, Michael... Interjection, sorry. Thank you. Your voice sounded so nice. Interjection. Michael Graham was like, or no, what was the other guy's name? I forgot his name.
At last night?
Yeah.
Also don't remember his name. Oh.
Yeah, at one point he was like, we thought these Italians were, some might call them freedom fighters, but they were too well trained.
The Russians were behind it.
Yeah, the Russians were behind
So he called
fighters.
them terrorists and
basically
threw them in prison and killed them.
You can't be a freedom fighter if you're too well trained, because otherwise you're a terrorist. And you deserve to be waterboarded.
So yeah, there was
so much in that talk. Like, it was just like an insane amount of just... Anyway, 10, we want equality for women. Yay! Machismo must be revolutionary, not oppressive. Under capitalism, our women have been oppressed by both the society and our own men. The doctrine of machismo has been used by our men to take out their frustration against their wives, sisters, mothers, and children. Our men must support their women in their fight for economic and social equality and must recognize that our women are equal... That women, it should have said, but it's okay, I'll let it slide, are equal in every way within the revolutionary ranks. Forward, sisters, in the struggle. We fight anti-communism with international unity. Anyone who resists injustice is called a communist by the quote-unquote man and condemned. Our people are brainwashed by television, radio, newspapers, schools, and books to oppose in other countries fighting for their freedom. No longer will our people believe attacks and slanders because they have learned who is the real enemy and who their real friends are. We will defend our brothers and sisters around the world who fight for justice against the rich rulers of this country. Vivace! 12. We believe armed self-defense and armed struggle are the only means to liberation. We are opposed to violence, the violence of hungry children, illiterate adults, diseased old people, and the violence of poverty and profit. We have asked, petitioned, gone to court, demonstrated peacefully, and voted for politicians full of empty promises, but we still ain't free. The time has come to defend the lives of our people against repression and for revolutionary war against the businessman, politician, and police. When a government oppresses our people, we have the right to abolish it and create a new one. Boricua, awake, all pigs beware. Boricua. Sorry. 13, we want a socialist society. We want liberation, clothing, free food, education, healthcare, transportation, utilities, and employment for all. We want a society where the needs of our people come first, and where we give solidarity and aid to the people of the world, not oppression and racism. Hasta la victoria siempre. That was the Young Lords Party 13-point program and platform taken from the Virginia.edu 60s project, archiving that.
So what do you think is the importance today of this document?
I think this is living and breathing, frankly. Like everything here. I think maybe what... Like these struggles, like let's just take it one by one. So like 1, we want determination. Puerto Ricans should be able to get aid from like foreign countries if they want it without the U.S. having to like be the intermediary man. 2, we want self-determination for all Latinos being the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, not just DACA recipients, but their parents, like their family members, everyone who's in this country now who has like committed no crime, besides maybe crossing a border, but that shouldn't really be considered a crime because that's just like an arbitrary line like on the planet. So like all Latinos. We want liberation of the third world people. I guess in today's context, that's just like liberation for me in this context means climate justice for third world peoples, and like first world countries taking accountability for that, and that's what liberation to me kind of means. I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm kind of moving fast.
Like, I think that's a really good point you bring up. That the main, I guess, struggle for people is trying to survive. In a lot of ways, the effects of climate change that people are predicting here, but they're happening to everyone else, around the world. And I guess now they're happening. It's more and more. It's catching up to people in developed countries, in countries like the United States,
Right.
where that disproportionately contribute to climate change. Yes, we always feel the least of the impact. Now, that being said, I think that nature, the environment, and this climate change is also entwined with the social systems that have helped create it. And so, when people talk about liberation, people talk about political struggles and all that, I think it would be faulty to not factor in the environment, ecological relations that surround it too. That's just my opinion. I think that politics and the study of society and economics is all entwined with the study of ecology as such. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Rojas, do you have any?
Oh, as far as what Chimu was saying, I was this is something that you and Brian Doniger, you being Esperanza and Brian Doniger, have both spoken to me a lot about, as climate change is something that's terrifying, real, disastrous, but also simply I think this has also something to do with what Chimu was saying, in the nature that how political institutions relate to the environment, and everything we ever do is always going to be grounded in the ecosystem and like the trees and the soil and the atmosphere and the very real physical world we live in. It's also the possibility of hope for a more equitable world, simply because it's what natural disaster presents is something that no one can control, not politicians, not businessmen. It's like a disaster that will completely tear apart the legitimacy of existing institutions. And this is something you, I think, have thought.
I definitely. You were talking to me. Agree, because this whole idea of triumphant civilization, of progress, of systems that can repair themselves and move forward, into history, and create that history within a context of human dominion over nature, is that illusion is being shattered by climate change.
Plug in for a great book that's about exactly that, called this is Esperanza and I wrote an
Is it called
the Great Derangement.
Oh, never mind.
Oh.
I was gonna say Ecology and Socialism.
Oh, also a great book. And Creating an Ecological Society Towards a Revolutionary Future is two great books by Chris Williams. But this was a book that Esperanza heard Noam Chomsky talk about, and we wrote an article about environmentalism and capitalism where we quote the book at the time, though, despite neither of us had read it.
Not read it. I still have only skimmed that book, to be honest.
It's a good plug for this book. It's exactly about that concept. And for him, climate change discussion should start with Asia, because he sees it as this country who bought in, or as this continent who bought into this concept of, you will raise all your people out of poverty, you will be liberated through development, through capitalism, and there's this
they're the worst off now.
There's this shattering passage in the book where he's it gets caught up in, oh sorry, I just bumped a laptop, gets caught up in this metaphor of them searching for what's going to feed their people, building up this society, and then suddenly they get to the top, and they unmask the true face of progress, and it's their death facing them. And so then he talks about droughts and natural disasters, and they're the country that is I keep saying country, the continent that is already beginning to face the reality of the cost of progress. Again, should all be centered on the West and we are still and have always been the greatest carbon emitters into the atmosphere, and most carbon that is emitted in the atmosphere is emitted in the name of our consumption and our military, even if it's done internationally. It's a really good book. Sorry.
I'm trying to think back to what Jim always said originally about, that illusion shattering, but I don't want to just like focus so much on, I mean, like for me, the illusion has been shattered. Like it's not gonna, like it doesn't, for me, it doesn't take, or it won't take, it might, but like, I guess seeing just earthquakes and hurricanes just like devastating lives is horrible, right? But also what I think is so incredible about the moment that we're living in is that I also get to see like communities organizing themselves like in response to those disasters. Like you see this in Mexico, like people going around, and I was honestly really insulted with, I read the what is the paper we get?
New York Times.
I read the New York Times this morning, and it was talking about how like like this self-organized group of Mexicans went around searching for some girl named, I don't remember the name, just like let's say Sofia.
A lost child.
Yeah, a lost child that was supposedly, and I guess it was a false claim. Like this child did not exist, but they like went out and looked, like they demanded to like search through like rubble until they like could confirm that this girl that did not exist, even though that there was like already, I guess, supposedly indicators that this person did not, like she wasn't on the roster of the school, whatever. But like what like bothered me about that like coverage was that they described that self-organization and that like determination to like to save this little girl, whether or not she existed, as like a collective psychosis. And I'm like, no, that's like the most human reaction, like to try to label it as this like to use that word, derangement, is kind of just gross to me and mean, and what they're doing is everything that like it is natural in a way, and is what's gonna, I don't know,
is a world I want to live.
Is a world that's like gonna build a better Mexico, I don't know, than the one that hopefully will crumble along with.
I think that what you're talking about is why different political thinkers, conservatives, and people who, I guess, call them climate change deniers or whatever you want to call them, have such stiff reactions, because climate change means so much politically. It means so much socially, and the implications of that,
It's like, oh, you've been doing things wrong, like, since you founded, like, since you...
Yeah, it's like you can't think seriously about climate change without becoming a radical or a revolutionary, I think. Just honestly, like, you can't think about kindness, I think, long enough without realizing that the way...
Can we go back to this list and kind of keep going on ideas? Dang it, I lost it. No.
I can do a quick PSA.
Thank you.
So this Sunday from 12:30 to 2:30 at the Holyoke Heritage State Park, this is October 1st, there is a March for Racial Justice in Holyoke, Massachusetts. So I'll read the details quickly. So on October 1st, we will mobilize individual groups and community individuals, groups and community Massachusetts to march in solidarity with the National March for Racial Justice. Our goal is to harness dissatisfaction with the systemic violence, discrimination, and hate that plagues our society, and to turn that unrest into a mobilization that strengthens efforts for racial equity and justice. We invite you to stand with us and make your voices heard. Together, stand against oppression and challenge policies and practices that dehumanize people of color, communities of faith, persons living with disabilities, immigrants, and our LGBTQ community. United, our voices are much more powerful than when divided. United, we are a movement. United, we can march forward towards equality and racial justice. And then there's a long list of all the organizers involved, which, while scrolling through, I'm going to swear in a moment.
No, don't do it.
Okay, I'm not going to swear.
Ready? Just like blink at me when you need to be bleeped, and I'll bleep.
Okay, one of the activists in the Pioneer Valley And so I just want to read the description of the group because I've never heard of them before. So the Bad Activists in the Pioneer Valley is an inclusive, action-oriented, virtual plus real-life activist group. They meet every Sunday from 10:30 to 12:30 at Click Workspace at 9:30, so I'm guessing 9:30, in Market Street in Northampton. We have political discussions, organize and educate, write letters, make phone calls, and send emails to work to amplify existing local and national organizations fighting for justice, equity, reproductive rights, peace, and feminist progressive action. Attendees get contact info and sample scripts to make the process of contacting elected officials easy. We also provide postcards and stamps with the opportunity to donate, cover the cost of these supplies. As always, please bring 1. Your rage, 2. Love, and 3. Solidarity. Cell phones and or computer and charger, drinks or snacks to share. Optional. Kids are welcome. So yeah, there you go. That's the Bad in the Pioneer Valley.
Can I bring up something in this 13-point program that kind of stood out to me particularly? Was their kind of use of or like identification as nationalists, and what that means.
In what sense or what context?
In the 13-point program
Sorry.
of the young, we've been going all around.
Oh, I got you. I know you
of
mean.
the Young Lords Party, and like okay, so
That stood out to me too. Yeah.
Yeah, so like one of their points is that we must all organize our own, but then collectively, our own being like they mentioned, like if you're white, you need to organize your white brothers and sisters. If you're Puerto Rican, you need to organize your Puerto Rican. You know, like I think that's kind of where they're coming from. What I read.
You mean when they talk about nationalism?
Yeah, I feel like that's what they mean by nationalism is like, I don't know. Did you read into that differently?
Because later they talk about, I guess, as I interpreted it as them talking about their nation being multiracial.
Yeah.
So I think that for them nationalism is kind of is an entity outside of race, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's encompasses different races, but it has, you know, they still obviously being nationalists think that there is an essence to, you know,
to the nation state.
to the nation,
which is, I think, like, I could see how that would have been maybe a smart rallying like cry in the 60s. I'm gonna put this out there. I think nationalism today is, like, in any sense of the word, like even in this context of like multiracial nationalism, right? Sort of flawed with our now our understanding of some of the global issues that we're talking about, such as climate change. Like we have to start thinking beyond the nation state in our organizing and in our like political thinking. I think, I don't know. And so what do you think about that?
I just think it's I think that's really good analysis, and I think you're spot on to point that out. Like that's something that does not resonate the same way today as it did when they put out that program.
Right.
But I think it's just we have to think about what do they mean by nationalism. You know, is one thing to say the nation state, but you know, this idea of nationalism has different iterations and different meanings. So do they mean the nation state? Do they mean
Community.
do they mean community? I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. You know,
That's how I saw it. Sorry. I did not mean to speak for Chimoy in that moment. My apologies.
but you know, there's also the national question put out, you know, by more Marxist tradition. There's other you know, different ways of trying to theorize nation, and I think that's one way to think about it. The other thing is that territoriality, which is, you know, essential to a nation state. You know, borders. You know, I guess a modern state in general has a very different, I guess, context on an island than it does on a large continent.
That's so true. Yeah.
So I was thinking of that too when you were speaking, like the idea of being an island nation, you know, with confined borders, is very different than being a nation that is, for instance, shares borders
Mhm.
all around with other nations, in Europe, or even shares a single border, like Canada and the U.S., or the U.S. and Mexico.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah, like the identity, I wouldn't know because I'm from a landlocked state in the desert, but like I'm sure like coming from an island shaped their political like thinking. And maybe nationality for them was the strongest way to like conceptualize what it means to be Puerto Rican seeking liberation. I don't know.
and another thing to think about is that decolonization. A lot of people talk about, decolonize. You need to create a nation, post-colonial nation. Other people say that you need to go farther than that, and depending on who you talk to, and depending on how you interpret different things, So, also ideas of decolonization have changed since when they brought out this platform.
I think just to plug another, it's not a book, it's a pamphlet I really like. Abdullah Öcalan, who is the founder of the PKK, which is a Kurdish freedom fighting force, and influenced a lot the Rojavan cantons. He has this document, I'll call it, called Democratic Confederalism, which is a really strong analysis of pretty much what Chimoy says, that in the struggle, like a post-colonial state, we can't return to ideas of nation states. We need small democratic confederalist societies of mutual aid and anarchy, and a much more beautiful place to live. It's I could read it in like 30 minutes, and it's got history in it too. It's really cool.
Nice.
And that issue comes up among Native people, and this, when you think about Native nations, and a lot of them kind of challenge the territoriality of the United States, because you have Native peoples like the Kumeyaay, or the Tohono O'odham, or the Blackfeet, that I guess are an entity on both sides of a state border, a nation-state border
Yeah.
today, and that brings up the issue of, what does that mean to have a supposedly sovereign nation, even though we know legally they're not technically a fully sovereign nation because of the treaties, and because of the way the United States has manipulated the relationship between Native nations, that they, but anyway, different story. But what are the implications, that have these Native nations that are kind of breaking the border up? And that's one of the reasons why Native sovereignty can be threatening to the state, is because Native people are asserting their own territoriality outside of the definition of a modern state entity. And also just the idea of Native nations, that's a whole topic in and of itself that has a different form, though it's very connected, and the ideas go back and forth between what we're talking about with Puerto Rico, where we have a nation in another context of decolonization and colonization.
Mhm.
I'm looking up a quote, sorry. I won't contribute to this conversation for a while.
Okay.
But I think the question you brought up is really important
About
for people to
nationalism.
think about. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you think about nationalism today, you think of Trump supporters. You think of this very skewed understanding of what it means to belong to. I think of blind patriotism. I think of blind
Of justifying the war on
racism.
terror.
Yeah, exactly. I think of that. Yeah, exactly. So for me, I'm wary when I hear a call to be patriotic, right? In any context, whether it's like a call to be a patriotic Mexican or American. But at the same time, there's like, I can't deny that as a modern human, whatever that may mean, I guess part of what that means to me is that even though I understand that there's like a global world and a global community that's suffering because of capitalist conditions that have like essentially made this planet like down the path of like we can't inhabit it soon. Sorry, that was not very eloquent at all, but
You're good.
I lost my train of thought completely. Basically, what I was let me think. I think I was trying to make the point that even though I like understand that conception of nationalism as it's portrayed by like Republicans and the right and most people that are like waging war on like the rest of the world conceptualize nationalism, like when I still get hyped when it's like the 16th of September or like when it's like Mexican Independence Day. Yeah. Like even that's I think part of again living in this moment is like, even though I can kind of hate the idea of nationalism a lot of days, at the same time I like do feel patriotic in certain moments, and I like want to acknowledge those moments like as well, just because they do mean something about what it means to be alive today and like what it means to be a human now. I don't know.
That got me very excited because I think it relates a lot to what I mean. Yeah, we're like a dumb radio show. The project I think we're trying to can I read from Abdullah the book I was talking about?
Yeah.
It's super quick. And yeah, I think it defines what's terrifying about because putting words in your mouth, so tell me where I'm wrong, but I think what you're trying to do is strike a balance between the terror of patriotism as an allegiance to a nation state, its military actions, its political institutions, its economic institutions, and patriotism as a source of community and identity and like shared experience with other people. Oh, okay, cool. So this is Abdullah Öcalan. So the nation state in its original form aimed at the monopolization of all social processes. Diversity and plurality had to be fought, an approach that led into assimilation and genocide. It assimilates all kinds of spiritual and intellectual ideas and cultures in order to preserve its own existence. It aims at creating a single national culture, a single national identity, and a single unified religious community. Thus, it also enforces a homogeneous citizenship. And I think that in, again, this modern world we live in that is dominated by nation states all running this planet into destruction, like the most like beautiful thing you can do in response to that is not to like throw the concept of community and of shared things with each other, but rather like, again, dumb radio show, but like do what Uncultured is trying to do of I think we stole this from what are they called, the shirt you have from carving out your own culture. I think our tagline is like carve out your own utopian culture or something like that, of like finding the things in your shared experience with others that are like alive and human and like really beautiful and powerful to you, and having a little radio show with your two buddies and talking about those things. And that's also like going out at night to look for a little girl who may or may not exist, instead of like, showing patriotism for a country that disappears citizens and journalists. It's like the opposite of that, right? To use that patriotism, that community, to like find someone. And I think in that you find yourself.
Cool. Thanks for those very heartfelt thoughts, Rojas. Period. Since you mentioned Chulita Vinyl Club, I think now, since we're almost approaching the end of our show, would be a good time to fulfill our promise of being cumbias and garage garbage radio show. Nice. So I can bring the cumbias if you can bring the garage garbage. So this is off Chulita Vinyl Club's Chulita Chihuilicue Cumbia Chulita playlist, which you can find on SoundCloud. They put all their playlists. They're not going to be making any for a couple months, just because they've been doing super cool stuff. They've been doing like benefit shows for Dallas, like for Texas, Florida, Mexico. So they're really cool people. Check them out. I looked up because I don't actually know what this means. Chalchuilicue, but it means jade. And she was an Aztec goddess of waters, rivers, seas, streams, storms, and baptism, related to the water god. I'm certainly saying these wrongs. I'm sorry. Chalchuihuatlot. Something like that. Feel free to correct me in prison. But yeah, here's the first song on their playlist, which I don't really know the title, but I'll try to look for it in the time that this song is playing. Did you want to speak?
Oh, no.
He didn't want to speak. That was Caruseles by Aníbal Velázquez from Colombia. And now we're going to play some Garage Garbage, Rojas's So Kind to Share.
It's actually just punk, but yeah. So this is what Joy Division was before Division. They were called Warsaw. And this is a song called The Drawback, which reminds me of a lot of things we've been talking about, of inheriting a strange world.
All of this for you.
less Joy Division and more Monkey House.
That was actually Warsaw.
Oh, sorry. I don't know things.
Yeah, so local Santa Barbara band that was playing a few years back. They haven't been playing a couple years for various reasons, but I thought that would be good to bring this band around and see what people think in Massachusetts. We never played any of our songs, I think, on this side of the country before. So this, from Santa Barbara, just a local band. I don't know who's in it. And we'll play the second song. This song is short and sweet, so.
That was good.
That got me turned, as the kids say.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite songs they play.
What was it called again? Can you remind me?
Watch the World Die.
Watch the World. Oh. All right, let me see if I can contribute more cumbias to this.
Yeah, I think the band, with their lyrics and what they're talking about, watching the world die, it has what we were talking about earlier, with this image of people not being able to understand or accept climate change, or accept the things that are going on in the world in light of their ideas of nationalism, progress, civilization, and their understanding of how the world functions, and it's down to like the deepest philosophical level.
Right.
And that's my interpretation.
One more PSA. Can I just, for anyone who's listening, if you would like to come to a meeting on Sunday at 1 p.m., you're welcome to. 4 p.m. in an unspecified place yet, but if you have a Facebook, you can look up.
Email Roliva19 at Amherst roliva96@gmail.com if you want to know more.
Yeah, if you want to help plan a climate camp at Amherst College, then come through. We'll be doing that. We've already started planning quite a bit of it, but the date got pushed back to the weekend after break. So if you want to get involved with that, that'd be awesome. And we need as much help as we can get. So this is Cumbia de las Aves by Chancha Via Circuito. Boys being Santa Barbara boys.
I should have done something with this picture. It was like, this is how Mark felt after the Amherst College Republicans event.
Dang it, Rojas, you missed a perfect opportunity.
Oh, we're still on air, sorry.
Can we talk over the song?
Yes.
Do you want to? So I remember I was telling you that I had thought of a perfect question to ask.
I do. You want to...
Yeah, like, I just don't understand why they just... Free speech is their thing, right? They said that maybe 20 times during...
And congratulated themselves throughout for...
Yeah, it's just
free
this...
speech,
yeah, exactly. It's... They prided themselves in anarchists being banned from this country and repressing anarchist ideology from spreading, because otherwise it would like wreak havoc on the planet. Yeah, basically what he said, which is not true.
In states, it was just an anarchist trying to rid the world of these systems that cause the systems to just like
anarchy is evil. At the speech, which I wanted to raise my hand and be like, if you're all about free speech, then why can't you tolerate anarchist ideology? Like this, I self-identify as an anarchist. Like I think that the ideology promotes freedom and liberation and equality. So like why is that? I don't know. That's kind of just what I wish I had said last night.
Yeah, I genuinely don't know what their answer would be.
I think they would have been like, girl, you are like
Great. Into a joke, yeah.
Yeah. They made fun of like a Muslim woman there. Like they literally mocked her for not knowing laws in Libya, which is a country she's not even from. She's from Tunisia. Like so
It's right next to where you're from.
So why don't then she's like,
tell me all the laws in Mexico, which I thought was a pretty good counter.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. Also make the comment, not that anyone's really listening, but like it's now really funny to me that I am photo with the Amherst College Democrats Facebook photos and the Amherst College Republicans Facebook photos.
And the international, so you're just the banner child of so many different organizations.
Exactly, and I don't necessarily like politically aligned with any. So it's interesting. So yeah, if you see them and are like, maybe I should be a Republican because Esperanza Chidas is seen.
That's a cool looking girl.
Is sitting at this talk. No, you should come to this meeting on Sunday and help me plan a climate camp.
God bless.
Yeah. It's been super, super fun talking to you, Rojas and Chimoe. Chimoe stepped out to be a social butterfly, I think. Right?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Chimoe does.
Be a social butterfly and pee.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been great. And I can't wait. Hopefully next week we'll have a little bit more of a
agenda?
Yeah, agenda. Maybe
This
more
was beautiful,
tunes.
though.
This was nice. I do agree. I think we had some heartfelt, serious conversations that needed to be brought up. And hopefully we'll have more next week. If you want to hear anything specifically, like feel free to reach out to us at our emails. Mine is Esperanza_Chidas at Yahoo, if you care to know. Or roliva
96 at gmail.com.
96. Yeah. Ciao. Take care. God bless.
Hey.
Viva Puerto Rico libre.